Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the webinar, Putting the Social Back into your social media. My name is Sakina Vora, and I'm the Volunteer Events and Marketing Officer here at Connecting Up. Our speaker today is Kirsty Wallet. Kirsty is a social media specialist and founder at K. Frank Social, having spent 10 years in the media, marketing, and communications industry. She also writes for several blogs and runs Brisbane's biggest socially engaged travel networking group, Brisbane Travel Massive. So before I hand it over to Kirsty, just wanted to go through some housekeeping notes. To those who are new, please feel free to type in your questions in the question box. We will try and make sure to answer all the questions at the end of the presentation. If you're facing any technical issues, like if you're having any audio issues or are unable to see the slides, please type in those issues as well and we will get them sorted out for you. This presentation is being recorded, so everyone present will receive an email with the link to the recording and the slides by the end of day today. So without further ado, I'll pass it on to Kirsty.
Thank you, Sakina. Good morning, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining me for this webinar. Today's presentation is all about taking the next step with your social media content, making it more social so that you can encourage growth of your online community or your specific social media channel, whatever that may be. And it's about more engagement and interaction. But the beauty of this presentation, I think, is that whether you've got 50 people on your Facebook page or you've got thousands of followers on your Twitter, you'll be able to apply some of these things we talk about today regardless of the size of your community. As Sakina mentioned, I've got a fairly diverse background. I started off in media before moving into marketing, public relations and social media. Just to give you a bit of an idea of some of the organisations I've worked for, I've worked for both not-for-profits in government with the Queensland Police Service, but also with Alzheimer's Australia, and I've worked as a consultant for some small not-for-profit campaigns as well as bigger consumer companies like travel website whatif.com. So my experience is quite broad, but what I've found is that the basic principles apply. You can tweak some of those for the not-for-profit sector, but the not-for-profit sector, depending on what your core business is, you know, there really is a wealth of content that you can use to engage your online communities. So that's the good news for everyone who's registered today and is listening. I've got a real passion for social media as well, so I'm happy to take as many questions as we like at the end, and please be as specific as you can with those. I'd love to give you as much information as we can today. So whether you're managing a really large audience or a really small one, hopefully you can take something away today and start tweaking your content to get a little bit more social back into your social media. And I'll go on to exactly what I mean about that on the next slide. But before we go anywhere, I'm a big fan of memes, so I warn you there will be a few in the presentation today. And I'm sure if you're working with social media in your organisation, everybody who's got a Facebook page can tend to be an expert. So this presentation really is about what's worked for me and what I've noticed in the marketplace that I think works really well. So everyone's got an opinion on what works well with social media. But I do believe there are some golden rules, for want of a better phrase, that you can apply to your social media content to give it that little bit of a kick. And some of you may already be doing some of these things today, and hopefully that's a little bit of reinforcement that you're on the right track. So when I say social, what I mean is the pretty basic definition of it. It's not rocket science. To be social, the dictionary definition is to live in a community, to live with companionship, rather than in isolation. So really when you break it down, social media is about building communities, having conversations that are two-way. And that's really what I think it all breaks down to. So really on your social media, you should be having a two-way conversation with your community. No, everything you can't post can be a question. You can't have every single post being engaging. But you should be thinking about it every time you create content for a post. We'll get a little bit into the details of how you tailor those depending on Facebook, Twitter, or whatever channel you're looking at. So you should be encouraging that engagement and interaction. And the content should be relevant and on topic. So what's your core business? What is your core task of your organisation? What are the business goals? What are the organisational goals? And is your social media integrated with that? And the short answer is that it should be. And for that to work, you really do need to have a strategy. Now, sometimes strategy can be defined as a lot of different things, but it's basically a plan and a higher plan, knowing why you're there. Why are you on Facebook? What are you there for? How is it helping the organisation? And this doesn't need to be complex to start off with, particularly if you're in a not-for-profit where resources are pretty tight. It just needs to be a conversation with the leaders in your organisation about why are we there, why do we need to be there, and how does it help our organisation by being there. If you're on social media, it should be an extension of your brand and your core business in a social way. And this is where the putting the social back comes in. If you want to be having one-way conversations with people, I suggest you do email newsletters or EDMs because they're quicker, they're cheaper, they're less time-consuming in a lot of cases. And you're just having a one-way conversation with people and trying to get them to click through to your website or to other content you might have. If you're on social media, you need to be having the two-way conversation, otherwise why are you there? So hopefully just with that small introduction you can start to think about whether are your posts social, are you just talking at people the whole time, are you posting great links and great content but not encouraging people to get involved in your content? And without that two-way conversation you're really going to struggle to build an online community. So hopefully by the end of this presentation, you should be able to just have a look at what your own organisation is doing, have a look at the content and the strategy, and hopefully you've got one. If not, there's no need to panic. That's something that you can do, and many organisations set up their accounts first and start posting and then think, hang on, I need a plan. And lots of people are guilty of that, so don't worry if that's you or that's your organisation. That's really quite common. I'm also going to show you some case studies, so some examples of some great accounts or great not-for-profits and their content. And it's really going to be having a look at what's working, what's not working. And hopefully you'll be able to decide what you need to do to improve your online community. Even if you've got 100,000 people on your Facebook page, there's always stuff you can do to improve it, to improve that engagement and make sure you're ticking all the boxes when it comes to your social strategy and your business goals, your organisational goals. So I talked about the golden rules, and you know, when I've worked with individual organisations, these are the things that have come out all the time. These are the basics. Things will change depending on what your core task or your core business is of your organisation, but these are the basic things that you need to be looking at when you're setting that strategy, or even when you're reassessing how things are going. Perhaps you're not progressing as quickly as you might like on your Facebook page or on Twitter. So the first thing you need to be looking at is, why are we there? If you're an organisation, for example, that works with the homeless, you may need to look at what channels are best going to serve you. Perhaps Pinterest or Instagram isn't. Do you have a lot of image content? Is it relevant to your organisation if you're working with the homeless? Probably not. So particularly if your resources are tight, you wouldn't open that account. You wouldn't go there just because everybody's doing it. So if you've got a Facebook page, is Facebook the best place for you to be? What's your demographic of your organisation? Who are you trying to reach? And are they actually on Facebook? These days, sort of everybody is on Facebook, so it's the safe bet, I guess. But really have a look at that. And I'll go into some details in the case studies later about why Facebook works for certain demographics more than others. Who is your audience? Now, this is a simple question, but it's obviously quite a complex answer sometimes. You should know this in your organisation. If you've got someone doing fundraising or marcons, or you are that person, hopefully you've got a bit of an idea of who your audience is. Because that's who you should be communicating to on a regular basis. So if you want to replicate that audience on social media, by all means start there, but also be open to the concept that you may develop a different demographic or a different audience on Facebook, for example. When I worked for whatif.com, they had a very wide demographic, pretty male, female, even skew. But we had a completely different audience on our Facebook page, which had more than 100,000 people. And it was skewed towards where Facebook is skewed, but it was women between 25 and 50. So we were very careful to tailor our content on Facebook towards those women who were booking holidays. So that's a little bit of an example about how your audiences can differ from channel to channel. Whether it's your email database that you might ask people for fundraising asks, or Facebook. So keep that in mind when you're looking at who your audience is, and target the right audience. So who do you need to reach the most? Who's the key person? You might have, as I just said, many different audiences, but accept that simple is the key, and you can't be everything to everyone. And I'll show you some examples of what that looks like later in the presentation. The issue with trying to be all things to all people and trying to communicate with everyone all at the same time is that the messages aren't clear, and you really, in my experience, will struggle with engagement. So, for example, going back to that whatif.com example, if we knew that that audience was mainly women and they were the ones mainly booking the holidays, then we certainly weren't going to post things on that page that might appeal to men, like it sounds very stereotypical, but golf holidays, etc. So those things didn't do well because we weren't talking to the right people. And often you see this really commonly on Facebook pages, people trying to be all things to all people, trying to do the fundraising ask, so trying to talk to donors on Facebook as well as talking to the group that may be your consumers. So if you have different audiences, you really need to think hard about with your particular social media channel, whether it's Facebook or Twitter, and they do tend to have a different demographic, those channels in general. Why are we there? And let's really hone that message there. This will make a little bit more sense when we get to our case studies, so hopefully everyone's still with me. So what is good in social media world anyway? And like I said, it's all very open to opinion, but it all comes back to your planning. You need to know the basics of your strategy right from the start. What's your core business and why are you on social media anyway? And how does it align with the organisation's bigger business strategies? Because if you're the person who is trying to sell social media to the CEO and why you need more resources or why you need more time, it's going to make your job a lot easier if you can tie in with how it fits in with the bigger picture with your organisation. Narrow down that target audience. Who do you want to reach and why? Why are you communicating with them? Is it to educate them? Is it to ask for feedback? Is it to ask for a donation? And we'll touch on donations just briefly because that can be quite controversial. And have that conversation, have that two-way conversation, otherwise why are you there? And the final one, here's a bit of a tricky one, accept that social media is not free or quick. And again, if you're that person trying to sell up to the CEO or the management team about the benefits of social media, and there certainly are many, you do need to be careful that you don't sell it as quick and free and easy, because it takes a lot of time into putting content, and you need to have someone that you can trust in that organisation to monitor it should you need to deal with some negative feedback or criticism. And social media is a great place to deal with that sort of stuff. And so this brings us to our first case study. The RSPCA have a fantastic Facebook page and they have great engagement levels there. But for me, they're a really great example of how to use Facebook well for a not-for-profit and how to balance content and different types of content. It's fun, this page, it's on message, its content is quite social, and they know who their audience is, and they're speaking to them specifically, even though they do have a really wide breadth of topics, as you'll see if you have a look at the page later today. So the first little example they have is, yes, animals are a dime a dozen on social media and they will always get you plenty of likes. But for RSPCA, it's actually really relevant for them. So they've developed here something really simple. They've put a simple dog meme there, but they're having a two-way interaction by asking people to send through their memes and funny pictures. This is really basic. You know, it's not about animal cruelty, it's not about animal welfare, it's not about the sort of more serious topic that they do deal with sometimes on the page. This is just something light to start the week with. So simple, but really effective in helping people feel like they're part of that community. They also do a really good job at RSPC Australia at responding to people's criticism. And I guess it's a pretty basic thing, this two-way conversation concept and the responding to criticism. But I'm sure if you look at Facebook pages or brand pages when you're on Facebook yourself, you'll see that it's really common for brands not to respond to people. And for me, that's one of the cardinal sins of social media. You need to acknowledge people's comments, particularly criticism. People do get really nervous on occasion about receiving negative criticism on social media. And I guess my answer to that would be that if someone's saying something negative about your organisation or they have a complaint, yes, they might call your reception, or if you have a call centre, they might call there. But if they're coming to you on social media, you've got a really good opportunity to turn that criticism around in a very public way. So not only can you help deal with that person's criticism and hopefully turn them into a brand advocate for you, but other people will be able to see that, particularly on a Facebook page and on Twitter. So it's really important to see criticism as a really great opportunity to really turn people into a brand advocate. So somebody who will advocate for your organisation. People will be communicating that criticism anyway, even if it's not on your Facebook page, even if you're not on Twitter. They'll be telling their family and friends, and you don't have a chance to respond in that situation, whereas with social media you do. So this one here is an example, and hopefully everybody can see that slide well, about the criticism, and RSPCA do get a lot because it can be a fairly hot topic. So somebody there has made a comment about, you don't need my donation, you have plenty of money. And you'll see there the huge response that RSPCA has given that woman. Really professional, really detailed, not dismissing her comment at all, but dealing with it in a really neutral way. And then you'll see there somebody's written something that's not particularly a criticism, but just a question, and they've gone to a lot of trouble to answer that. And to answer it really quickly as well, you can see there's not even half an hour between that second response there. There's a little bit longer up the top, and I would say that's just they're getting their facts right and wanting to respond as accurately as they could. So they've taken it really seriously, and you'll see there it's been liked by 6 people, so other people have seen it, not just the lady that posted the original criticism. So look guys, this is pretty basic stuff, but it can be hard to do well when you're resource tight. More examples of what RSPCA Australia have done with Twitter. So they did a political activation campaign on Twitter, and Twitter's a little bit of a different audience, of course, you know, more made up of influencers, you know, people who are active online, media, politicians. So Twitter is a great place to be activating something a little bit more political, a little bit more of a political campaign or a lobbying campaign, something with a little bit of a tougher message when you're trying to meet, you know, get that in front of decision makers and influencers. So what they did here was they were lobbying for some change to legislation, and they had a little microsite to support that as well. Obviously they've got fantastic resources at RSPCA Australia as well. So this is also RSPCA on Twitter. This is the example of the tweet they used with that campaign. So they've got a nice, great hashtag there. Obviously that hashtag is going to link all of the content together. They're getting some great retweets and favourites from people there, as you can see. And we've got some great interaction down the bottom. They have really cornered their use of Twitter, so they've got that political activation, and then they've got the media as well. So that's just a simple post to a media release, which any organisation could do, but knowing that Twitter is really populated by journalists and media. Now, this is another example of some work that whatif.com did with RSPCA's Cupcake Day. So this is really an example of how to interact with other influencers on Twitter. So obviously Whatif has a very big following on Twitter. And this is just something really simple. It's just one tweet with some photos. And it's about just making contact with other organisations that might be supporting your organisation, individuals as well that may have a really big following on Twitter. Most people will be more than happy to tag you, to get involved. And it's something that you can include in instructions when you're talking about a campaign. Please let us know if you've got something you'd like to share on social media. And it's really simple interaction, but really effective. Also a good way of accumulating more followers. So to some common mistakes, and RSPCA do a great job, but even they're not immune to the odd off-topic post or something that probably doesn't quite work. So you can tell that their team is based in Canberra, and they've got a happy birthday Canberra, and they're also talking about sharing a recipe where they're using higher welfare eggs. So there's a little bit of a link there, but in terms of who their audience is, animal lovers, animal welfare lovers, people who are really passionate, in my opinion, the Happy Birthday Canberra doesn't quite gel. I mean, we don't want to Canberra bash too much because it's a great place. I went to university there, but there's nothing sort of linking Canberra there and RSPCA Australia other than the fact that it's the capital and it's probably where the team is based. So look, not a horrible post, not a terrible post, but not really on topic. And for me, this is probably the biggest mistake that I see with not-for-profits and for consumer brands as well. There's a real temptation to jump on that bandwagon of putting a meme on Facebook or tweeting something about a cute photo about an animal. And that's fine to tweet animal photos if you are RSPCA Australia, but if it's not relevant to what you do in your core business, then you're off topic and you start to lose people then because they're there to follow you for a reason. They're there because your content's great or they believe in what you do. It's not to say you can't be fun and creative, but it's really important that you keep it on topic and keep it relevant to what you do. If you stick to this golden rule, what are we saying, why are we saying it, and to who, you should avoid this. And that's where that strategy comes back in as well. And this is a particularly controversial one, as I mentioned earlier, especially for not-for-profits, because there is that belief out there that social media is easy to access. Everybody's on Facebook, for example. But in my experience, it is generally pretty tough to fundraise on social media. That's not to say that some of the bigger organisations aren't doing it well and integrating with things like Everyday Hero and Go Fundraise pages, but it's pretty tough to do. And I would say there wouldn't be a lot of organisations in Australia where their social media fundraising is eclipsing any other channel that they fundraise in. And there's a reason for that, and any fundraisers who are here today will know that. You've really got to build up to that ask, and you've got to have that engaged donor. And it's tough to do on social media. So you really do need to accept the hard truth sometimes that sometimes the best content won't be the fundraising ask, and it won't ever be the fundraising ask. It's not that you can't share information about fundraising events on your Facebook page, for example, and you can't talk about it, but if you're gearing your resources towards fundraising specifically on social media, then you may have to be realistic about what your targets are and how much you really want to raise. So this is a great example of really strong content from Oxfam Australia that isn't about donating and isn't about an ask, but could lead to one. So this was about International Day of the Girl Child, and a beautiful quote there and a stunning picture and great interaction. It's had 513 likes, but look at the shares in the right-hand corner, bottom corner, 529, because it's beautiful and inspirational. And quotes, if they're relevant to your core business and your organisation, are a great way to engage with your audience. And they've really put a call to action there. Please share to show your commitment. This is a great example of social content. It's a clear message, it's asking for some engagement, and it's really speaking to the audience, to those people that will like Oxfam Australia and the sort of causes they will want to support. The most important part of this post, I think, is that call to action. Please share to show your commitment. It's not like if you want this, like if you want that. It's a really subtle yet strong call to get people to engage. If you are going to do the fundraising ask on your Facebook page, really important to really plan up to it, work up to it. You know, obviously you wouldn't start your page and ask in your first week. You really need to build that community, the same as you would in any other channel. So I wanted to use some examples next from my time at Alzheimer's Australia. So there was a very small community there when we started working with the Facebook page, and as I mentioned, the same concepts really do apply. I mean, things get a little bit trickier sometimes when you're dealing with a bigger audience, but most of you, I assume, will be in the situation of building from a small base. So how do you do that? This is definitely one organisation, as I mentioned, that was guilty of setting up the accounts first and then thinking about, well, what exactly is the high-level strategy? There was definitely plans in place, but what are we there for? So we did a 360 in the organisation's approach to social media, using it to deliver the support and services, which was the core business of the organisation in Queensland. And it was about supporting people with dementia and their carers. So the audience was really narrowed for this Facebook page. We talked with the fundraising manager, and we were going to avoid a fundraising ask and really work on building a community for carers of people with dementia. So that would mean content that's relevant to them, information about speakers, educational information, rather than trying to be all things to all people. We tested content, and even though there was a very small audience on Facebook, we found that asking people for information or what they wanted was a great way for them to tell us what they wanted to see. So you've got to remember, you've got that two-way conversation happening. Ask people what they want to see on the page. What do they want more information about? And it's important to reach people where they already are. So a lot of carers were professional women aged between 40 and 65, so that's the general demographic, and that fit perfectly with the Facebook demographic as well. So Facebook was the ideal place for this to take place. So just having a look at those simple things, who are we talking to, what should we be talking to them about, and let's ask them and check that's what they want. Test some content. We moved from content that looked a little bit like this, so this was before we had a look at the content and the planning. Visually pleasing. And there's no call to action here either. What is happening with the two-way conversation? There isn't really much at all. So this was the new content we tested. We had a speaker, so same topic, an international speaker coming from America. We did use the animal thing here, which was relevant because we took this particular professor to see the koalas. But look at the right-hand side, what people have talked about. So people would just, this was just a post saying, you know, how did you get involved with Dementia Awareness Week? Thanks for all your support. And we've got this lady, Jo Pengilly, on the side here going into a lot of really personal detail about her battle with caring for her parents with dementia. So we knew by these sorts of posts that people were wanting to have that conversation. They were wanting to share really personal information, and this was a really good sign that we were heading in the right direction. Those carers wanted to have a support network, they wanted to have information, and they wanted to be able to talk about what they were going through. Obviously, organisations like RSPCA and Guide Dogs Australia and others can go to town with the animal pictures, as it's well on topic for them, but just be really careful when you're doing the cute factor or the fun factor. Just keep in mind you want it to be relevant. So there are a few things to consider, particularly in regards to Facebook. And I've talked a lot about Facebook because it really is the biggest network in terms of active users, but I'm happy to take some questions about other channels as well. So you'll all be aware that Facebook has geared its platform towards advertising. And unfortunately, it's an ad-driven world. So reaching all your fans now means that you have to pay for that privilege. And as unfortunate as it is, that is the reality. You can only reach the majority of your audience with advertising the way the newsfeed is in Facebook now. It doesn't mean that you can't develop really good content and get a lot of people to see it, but if you have something really important or a really important campaign that you want to launch, it's a good idea to be able to put a little bit of budget behind it. And you can set these ads up for minimal amounts, or you can sponsor your post for $5 a day, $10 a day for a week. So you think about that, $50, putting $50 behind it and testing that and seeing how it goes, trialing that to see if it will work for you. Unfortunately, you know, Facebook are fairly cagey about what percentage of your audience you might be reaching, but it is getting lower and lower. That's what we do know for sure. And this comes back to my point about it not being free. Social media, not free. You need to pay for putting resources into it. You need to spend time on it, which is money. And with Facebook, you need to accept that at some point you may need to pay for some advertising for a really important campaign or something you really want to get out there. Don't spread your resources too thin, and this comes back to how many social media channels do you need? Are you better off just on Facebook and get rid of Twitter? If you don't have the time for it, narrow it down and do 1 or 2 platforms really well. Resourcing is a big issue. You know, the social media takes time, it takes planning and skill. You need someone who can write really good content. You sometimes, you know, it's really handy to have photoshopping skills, image editing skills, video editing skills. If you don't have the staff or the resources and you haven't opened your social media channels yet, or you've got really small ones, consider delaying it. Consider delaying opening one at all, or opening a new social media account, or shutting some down. Target your efforts and do them really well, and then see where it goes. Because at the end of the day, it is a public-facing communication tool. And so you need to know that it's an extension of your brand in the marketplace. And further to that, you need to trust the people or person that you've got doing your social media. So if you've got volunteers, obviously are a really important part of a not-for-profit and a lot of not-for-profits. You really need to have the right person. If you're going to have a volunteer, I'd suggest they are a long-term volunteer who has a skill in this area. It's definitely not, social media is not something you should be giving to an intern or someone who's going to be there for a little while. There is a tendency to do that, and often those decisions are made by someone who's not aware of the day-to-day skill that's required. It's not that only specialists can do it, everybody can learn, but you do need to have those skills, great copywriting, an understanding of the social platform, and some of those photoshopping or image video skills, just so that you can get the best content out of it you can. So hopefully with some of the topics I've covered, you should be able to now go back and have a look at your own social media accounts. So go back and have a look at your posts, particularly the ones that haven't performed as well in terms of engagement, and assess if they're the posts that were off topic or they're the posts that were one-way conversations. Were you talking to the right people in the right way? Do you even know who your audience is? Jump on your Facebook Insights and have a look. Where are people from? What age are they? Does it match who you're talking to in fundraising? Does it match who's coming to your website? Hopefully you might know some of those things, but if not, go back and have a look. And also be open to the fact that that will change over time as well. Social media is very dynamic, and you may have an audience for 6 months at one point and it may shift in the next 6 months. So it's a good idea to regularly assess that. See if you're guilty of using off-topic content. And if you're very close to your brand, to the organisation, it can be really hard to see that objectively sometimes. But generally, they'll be the posts that don't perform as well with engagement, or do perform really well, but aren't talking about your organisation's brand or any of your core business. You may get, you know, thousands of likes on a cute puppy dog, but if you're not Guide Dogs Australia, is that relevant to what you're doing? And if you're not on the right track, try and use some of these key points to refocus your strategy. Break it down. Why are you there? Who are you talking to? And what are you trying to tell them about? They're the 3 basics that you can really have a look at your social media planning from a strategic level. So that wraps up the bulk of the presentation. Thank you, everyone, and I'm hoping to take some questions now.
Thank you so much, Kirsty. Yes, we do have a lot of questions, and I would encourage everyone to post as many questions because we still have 20 minutes to go. So the first question is from Michael. Kirsty, would you be able to discuss the audience type for each media? For example, the profile of people who use Facebook versus Twitter.
Sure. Yeah. Sure. So with this, just a bit of a disclaimer before we start. This is a dynamic environment. Sometimes the best way to get on and see what these figures are is to Google it. But in general, Facebook has a female skew, really from 25 to 60. And the fastest growing audience, or the most recent figures I've seen for Australia, is that 40 and over, particularly with women, is quite rapidly growing. So if that was your demographic, as it is for a lot of not-for-profits, obviously Facebook would be the place to go. There is some talk, although I haven't seen any solid statistics, about how Facebook is dropping off with those under 20. And if that's your key audience, then I guess perhaps Facebook may not be the place for you. But I haven't seen anything solid, any solid stats in Australia on that. And that's the other thing I would also just be careful of. If you're looking online for this sort of information, take with a grain of salt what Facebook tells you about who their active users are, because often they don't give the demographic breakdown. And when they do, remember that it's coming from them. And also, a lot of the statistics you can find online are American. So it's a good idea, but it's not necessarily indicative of what we have here in Australia. So that's Facebook for you. For Twitter, they're a little bit less forthcoming about the particular demographic, but with Twitter, for me, the important thing is who are the people that are on there. So you've got a lot of influencers, you've got media, so journalists, you've got media organisations, you've got politicians, you've got activists, you've got celebrities, and celebrities are great for activation for campaigns if you have a celebrity ambassador or you're wanting to go down that line. And generally, really online savvy people under the age of 50 are one of those audiences that are, I guess, seen as high value. on social media. So they're on Twitter as well. Obviously with Pinterest, I haven't seen any up-to-date stats, but in general that's a female skew, 25 to 60. And Instagram, I'm not aware of any recent stats with Instagram, but I would say there's probably a female skew on Instagram as well. But as I said, it is a real challenge to get really reliable statistics, but if you have a look around the internet, you'll see there are a lot of trends around those particular and the main channels, so Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest. I'd also encourage you to have a look at what you already have. So if you have a Facebook page, even if it's a very small audience, have a look at what your demographic is. Because at the end of the day, if you're already on that social media channel, it's important for you to know who you're talking to. I guess if you're looking at what platforms are best to start up, then you'd be interested to see what is the general demographic that is on that particular platform. But once you're there, more important to know who you're talking to already.
Thank you, Kirsty. We have another question from Lisa. How do you make a post like the Oxfam one with a quote and a photo?
Okay, so it really depends what your organisation is. I don't know if we have Lisa's organisation there. I might be able to use a more specific example.
Sorry, Lisa, would you be able to just type in the name of your organization? She's from Environment Center.
Oh, great. Okay. So you will have some fantastic content to work with. So how would you do a post like that? So first I'd find a really great image. And particularly if you're, the first thing that springs to mind for an organisation that deals with the environment would be a statistic, maybe a shocking statistic on deforestation, or a statistic on a particular endangered species, or not knowing the details of what you deal with. I'm sort of pulling things out of the air, but something like that. So a great statistic or a great fact for someone. Find a picture that's relevant. It can be hard to find license-free images. If you don't have your own images, it may be good to invest in something called Shutterstock or Getty Images, where you can buy a certain amount of really beautiful images for social media use. So however you do it, it's really important to have a great image library. And getting down to the basics, I would make sure that when you post that content, you keep it short and sharp. So if you've got a statistic and a fact for someone and it's 2 sentences, break it up, put the strongest part of the sentence over the top of that photo using Photoshop or some other image editor. Put the second part of that as your introduction to the photo in your post, and perhaps put a link to your website if you've got somewhere where people can find more information. It doesn't necessarily have a link. And then put a call to action. Put a like if you agree. Put a share if you agree. Put a like if you didn't know this. Put a share if you did know this. You don't always have to do that call to action, and I'd use that sparingly. You don't want to use that in every post. But I think with something that's got a really strong message, like an image with a fact or a statistic or something that people might know or might want to know, always good to ask people to share that content, I think, particularly if you put a bit of time into finding a really great image of a rainforest or an ocean or an animal. So I hope that makes a little bit of sense of how you would do a post like that. Think about what information you want to break down to the basic level to tell people about that they'll be interested in.
So we have another question here from Matt. I read recently that Facebook's new algorithms filters out many of the posts from pages that directly ask for likes or shares. Firstly, is that true? And if so, how do we increase engagement without directly asking for it?
I've heard that as well, and to be honest, I don't know if it's true. You would have to ask someone directly at Facebook. and even then sometimes they don't share that information. They tend to keep that information very close to their chest. Having said that, a lot of rumours do fly around about what the Facebook algorithm does and doesn't do. I would say anyway that you don't want to use that too much, that call to action, like if you want this, share if you want that. It definitely works in certain situations, like the Oxfam image that we were talking about. But, you know, as simple as it is, the good content is what will show up in the newsfeed. So just to break it down in a really simple way, if you put a really great image up and you have some really great information and you have a call to action, and what I mean by that is the initiation of the two-way conversation. So you're asking people for their opinion on something. You're asking them a question. It doesn't have to be the like, share. If you get people responding to that straight away, the virality of that post will go up, and as you will see in your own Facebook feed, you can see when a friend of yours likes something from a brand page. So your best bet is to make strong, engaging, eye-catching content. The more people that interact with it when they see it, the higher in that algorithm it will go. Video and images are really important. They will always do better than a link. And I would always try to avoid posting something without an image or a link or any sort of content with it. Sometimes it's necessary to do that. If you have just a short, sharp message, you've got to post on your Facebook page that's something urgent, you need to get it out there. Certainly you can understand there'll be situations where you need to do that, but I would avoid that at all costs. Apart from the fact that it's not very exciting or engaging, it doesn't help in the news feed whatsoever. So I guess to summarise, there are every now and again things that pop up that Facebook's doing this with the algorithm, they're doing that. I would try and keep your eye on the ball in terms of great content, because how much those things that Facebook are doing actually, you can't control a lot of that. They really are, I guess, calling the shots, but they maintain publicly, and I guess I do too, that good content should always win out. Got to remember though that they are building it for an ad platform. So if there's some good content and you really want people to see it, then you need to have that conversation with your CEO or with your manager, or as part of your strategy that do we have a little bit of money we can put towards advertising this message. So hopefully that answers that question for you.
Kirsty, would you recommend taking permission of people, whose post we show as examples during presentations, post basically from Twitter or Facebook?
Sorry, what was that, Sakina? You cut out a little bit for me.
Oh, I'm sorry. So, Kirsty, would you recommend taking permission of people, whose post we can show as examples during presentations, post from Facebook or Twitter?
Sure, yeah, I think so. I think if you're going to repost something as a brand, think about why you're reposting it. But yes, it's always good to make contact with people if you can, or credit them. You've got to be really careful using images as well, I guess. If you haven't bought the image or it's not royalty free, I'd be really careful about reusing images, particularly because a lot of them will be owned by copyright. So it can be really time consuming though to seek permission from people. So good to look into options, having an image library or some royalty-free website options if you can for that sort of content. But if you're generally retweeting or sharing, I think there's sort of a bit of an understanding that you are supporting them. So I wouldn't worry so much about that. But if you're replicating the content, then yeah, definitely you need to be either seeking permission or trying to find an alternative, I'd say.
Talking about advertising, is paying a small amount to boost a post, even if it's an older post, is nearly as good as advertising? This is a question from Kate. She doesn't feel very comfortable with advertising.
Yes, it's a prickly one. I guess, it would be great if we didn't even have to worry about the advertising on Facebook. And I guess there is a perception out there that what does our audience think about the fact that we are advertising this post? And you will have all seen in Facebook, you can see when something is sponsored. But I think again, the content is important. I don't mind seeing a sponsored post if it's good content. If it's annoying content, then it annoys me, I guess, because it keeps popping up. And I guess for me, my preference is promoting a post because the content is great. So that would be when you see a post with that content, photo, video, link in your news feed. And then obviously you've got your right-hand side down the news feed, and also when you're on your page where you have advertising. So I guess I've probably maybe confused some of you with the term advertising in general, but there are several different ways you can advertise on Facebook. Personally, what's worked better for me and for the organisations I've worked for is sponsoring posts. And it can be an uncomfortable arena, particularly for a not-for-profit. But it unfortunately is the reality of getting the message out there. And I think that people are more open to it than you may think. You personally may not like ads in the news feed, but if somebody sees your promoted post and it's great content, you'd be surprised how many people will still engage with it. The advertising down the right-hand side, so the advertising your page so that you can get a like, it can be really effective for building a community if you have the budget. So for me, that advertising is very limitedly successful promoting to external pages. So if you were to advertise your website, for example, on one of those ads down the right-hand side, you probably have limited success, or that's in my experience anyway, because it's taking people out of Facebook. But it is great to like the page. And you can build communities quite quickly, and you kind of get a like for, you know, it can be 70 cents, 50 cents, less than the dollar, if you have that sort of budget to invest. Because I guess there's the argument of you can be doing the best content in the world, beautiful pictures, beautiful video, beautiful copy, and if you've got 10 people who have liked your page and you're doing everything you can to get people to like that page and you're not building that community, you're still reaching 5% of those 10 people. So I think, unfortunately, the advertising is a reality of Facebook, and you really, I guess, need to discuss that within your organisation. If that's something that you may not be able to invest in, or that you're happy to just do your best without the advertising and lower expectations, I think perhaps that could work. Or if it's something you're uncomfortable with, it might be better to look at a different channel.
Okay.
I hope that's helped answer your question a little.
We have a question here from Ray. For some, Facebook is on the way out. Are there better options than Facebook and Twitter?
The quick answer to that is no, I believe. There is a lot of talk of Facebook being on the way out and users dropping, but it is still by far the biggest social platform there is. How much time you want to invest into Facebook, I think, would be more of the question. You know, if I was recommending to an organisation what they wanted to get started in social media, say they aren't already there, you'd need to have a look at your audience and who is your demographic. You really need to know who you're talking to. For me, Twitter's not always relevant for everyone, and likewise, neither is Facebook. For example, my business is not on Facebook at the moment. I'm just on Twitter because we have more relevant content there in Twitter. We have more engaged online people. We can use the hashtags really well. We can promote webinars and events. So, I mean, I've certainly have seen and read stories about Facebook on the way out. That may happen. It may be the MySpace of the 21st century. It may die out, but it's not happening just yet. And I think that, you know, as with any marketing, communications, fundraising, you need to look at what are the bigger business goals and the benefits for the organisation. And I think allocate your resources accordingly. If you don't have the resources for social media, I guess have a look at that in the wider context of the organisation, and just make sure that's the right decision for that organisation. It will differ from person to person. But essentially, to answer your question, I don't think there's any, if I was recommending to an organisation, depending on what their core business was, I would recommend one of the bigger platforms, because essentially you're going to reach more people, and that's the point. So there's not really any competition with Facebook and Twitter at the moment for me.
Okay, thank you. We have another question here. Cost benefit wise, is it worthwhile paying to boost content?
Look, I think in terms of, it really depends what your budget is and what your goals are. You really have to align everything with that. I think unfortunately with Facebook, you can only get so far without some advertising, and it will work better for some than others. So if you have the budget to test it, I think trial it to start off with. Cost effectiveness wise, it is some of the most cost effective advertising there is. For me in general, I mean, it's sort of like comparing apples and oranges. But in return on investment, however you might calculate that if you're a not-for-profit. I mean, if you're calculating that based on donations, it might be a little bit hard. But generally, I've found recently that Facebook advertising is delivering better results than online advertising to websites if you're pushing somewhere there. Again, comparing apples and oranges a little bit there. But if you look at TV and radio advertising and the cost and who you reach there, and then who you can reach on Facebook according to their reports, again, which take with a grain of salt, but you can see the interaction for yourself and the building the community for yourself. It is actually quite cost effective in terms of advertising in general. Whether you want to make that decision and invest it is up to you. That needs to come in as part of your bigger business strategy. But in terms of it being cost-effective advertising, it certainly is.
Okay, how often should Facebook be updated with posts? What is too much or what is too little?
So, well, things have changed recently with the news feed. As you would know yourself if you're a Facebook user, it's more and more clogged with content. When I was managing whatif.com's page, we had to be really conscious of how many times a day we posted, because people used to see everything a couple of years ago and before the advertising was introduced, and if they got sick of it, just like they do with email newsletters, they would unsubscribe, so they would unlike. That's less of an issue now, and in general, what I've found with the Facebook news feed is the more often you post, the better. Obviously, you need to be realistic about this. If you've got limited resources or you've got someone part-time doing it, I think 3 posts a week for a not-for-profit of a reasonable size organisation is a good number. But again, you'll need to have a look at your audience and how they respond to that. If you've got a bigger audience and you've got lots of content to put out there and you've got the resources to back it, there's nothing wrong with posting every day. That's for Facebook. With Twitter, obviously, you could tweet to your heart's content. You could do a couple a day, and that's certainly not going to annoy anybody because of the speed of Twitter. So with Twitter, it's actually a really good idea to repeat content, tweak your copy. If you're tweeting a media release or a link to a campaign or a link to a news story, you can do that same one twice a day to make sure that you're reaching the particular people that will be online at the time that you tweet. So that's generally the guide I use at the moment. It does change as the platforms change, but generally with feeds, news feeds and feeds that work a lot quicker, as in Twitter, you can post more often.
Okay, so we have a question here from Diana. How can we build our follower base without advertising?
So there are a few little tricks you can do depending on what other resources you have in your organisation. Sometimes doing little promotions, for a want of a better word, can help. So where you're asking people to share some information because obviously they're going to share that and their friends will see that and their friends will see that and hopefully like your page. That really is dependent on your content, I guess, and the people that you already have in your audience. Make sure you're promoting it offline. So if you have a website, a link to your Facebook page or a like us on Facebook should be on the home page, really easy to see, not down in the bottom corner. If you've got a website where you can have a flash ticker, put it on there, make it really prominent, even if it's just for a short period of time, so people can realise that you are on Facebook if they're on your website, and yes, I'm engaged with this organisation, and yes, I'm on Facebook, I want to like them. Brochures, it should always be on the backs of brochures, anywhere where you touch another audience or you market to another channel. But the best one of all is email. If you're sending an email newsletter, even a print letter, but obviously it doesn't work as well, if you're sending an email newsletter, consider making the fact that you've got a Facebook page, and please like us on Facebook, really prominent in your next newsletter, or send one totally about your social media to boost it. Because in my past experience with organisations, email activation is the best way to grow particularly your Facebook audience without having to advertise on Facebook. Obviously there's still like a cost associated if you're using that space in your email newsletter or you're sending out to your database, but if you have a database or if you have any sorts of contacts via email, I'd go there first and really have a think about planning out a little campaign to start off with to let people know that you're there.
Okay, it is 12 o'clock right now, and we will be here for around 5 to 7 more minutes addressing the rest of the questions. This is a question from Joe. I have a Facebook page for kids program that I run at a local gym. It is only run once a week. At the moment, all I'm using Facebook is for informing parents as to what's on this week. How else can I be of assist and develop my page?
Well, I think, Joe, you've got some really good potential content there. Obviously, it depends on how much time you can devote to creating content. But I think some little tips about the group or the things that you cover in the group, if you can have little health tips for kids, you know, some advice on what's healthy for them to eat, what kind of activity is good. Really look at your knowledge base and what can you offer them to add to that experience when they're there once a week. I would also get a bit creative with the page, and people who have liked it obviously have either been to an event or intend to go to one. Ask them for their feedback. What did you like about this week's group? What can we improve for you? It really depends on, I guess, the details of your core business there. But to me, off the top of my head, that sounds like something that really people are there waiting to get additional information and education, I would think, about those sort of topics that surround that group. And I think if you're posting once a week to let them know about the event, just add 1 or 2 more posts around, asking them would they like to see something new, or getting feedback on the groups, or little bits of tidbits of information about that might add to their experience in that sphere.
Can you explain the hash used in Facebook?
The hashtag.
Yes.
So I only sort of got half of that question, but I believe it was, can I explain a hashtag? So obviously you will have seen them on various social media channels. So the hashtag is fairly recent with Facebook. It originated on Twitter, and it's also used on Instagram as well, and various other channels, but they're the main ones. So basically the hashtag is a way of grouping conversation, and particularly Facebook, it's newer to Facebook, but you know, it's International Women's Day and you want to post something about International Women's Day and you put the hashtag International Women's Day in your post, it means that anyone that's looking for content on International Women's Day on Facebook can click on that hashtag, and it might be in your post or it may be in somebody else's, and they will see all the posts that have been hashtagged with International Women's Day there for them in front of them. So it's actually a really good way to gain new followers and for your content to expand outside your current audience. So particularly for not-for-profits where you're dealing with topics and education and lobbying, really important to have a key hashtag that you use in most of your posts. For example, when I was at Alzheimer's Australia, it was dementia, hashtag dementia. And that would group a lot of our posts with the general conversation on Facebook about dementia. It works the same on Twitter as well. So if you want to hashtag Cyclone Ita, which obviously was a big news story in Queensland recently, if you click on that hashtag when you're on Twitter yourself, you will see all the tweets that have been hashtagged Cyclone Ita. So it's really great if you're doing a little social media campaign to come up with your own hashtag, but I'd recommend using ones that are commonly used already. It's about getting your post into the broader conversation on that particular platform with that hashtag.
How do you formulate policies and procedures re responding to off-topics posts to your organization's Twitter account made by members of the public?
Okay, this is a really great question and something that really every organization should have a policy on, and I would encourage you to have the policy somewhere on your Facebook page, put it on a tab and have terms and conditions of using this page or advice for using this page, so that you're also outlining to the public what your standards are. In general, and obviously you need to discuss this within your organisation and work out what is realistic for you, but set some parameters around what you will and won't delete from the page. I really think the cardinal sin of, moderating particularly a Facebook page is deleting negative comments. Unless it's something extremely offensive or it's pornographic or it really contravenes, common decency, I wouldn't delete it. It doesn't look good, and I'm sure you've all seen stories about major brands deleting negative comments. So I would say that's an essential part of your policy. Have a policy around what comments will be deleted and why, and go into specifics, any racist material, any offensive material, that sort of thing. And make that publicly available on your page so people know what the rules are. And I think internally perhaps you need to decide who responds to those. Maybe have a little mini crisis communications plan. So if you get a really negative comment, is the person keeping an eye on the Facebook page the person who can decide how to respond to that, or do they need to speak to a manager? Have that worked out before it happens, not after it happens or not while you're trying to deal with a comment like that. But generally, legally you're responsible now for the comments that people make, so on your social media platform. So this is a really good question, and it is something that you do need to consider. Obviously something that's defamatory or illegal in terms of, say, naming sexual abuse victims is something that you would need to remove from your page. But when you're moderating, make it really clear that you've had to remove a comment. What I do is put a comment in the string saying, hello such and such, I'm sorry but your post contravenes the policy for our page, we are going to delete it. Post that first and then delete it so that you've got something there that says we've removed your comment because of X, Y, and Z, and take a screenshot of it. Make sure you've got evidence of it as well. Screenshot everything when you're concerned about what kind of post you have and whether it's offensive or not. So in some ways it's a judgment call, but there are really, when you're talking about extremely offensive or defamatory comments, there's a line there against what's legal and what isn't, and perhaps you need to do a bit of research on that. But you also need to still be able to, I guess, make a judgment call on what your organisation will allow in terms of the kind of content that you have on there, the kind of language. They're things you need to decide internally when it's not a question of legality. But I would really advise against deleting criticism and negative comments about the organisation. If they're not defamatory and they're not racist or highly offensive, you really don't do yourself any favours there. Have a look at other brand pages. Big communities will often have a terms and conditions tab or a rules for engagement on this page. So have a look at what some other organisations are doing if you need a little bit of a template of where to start, and then I'd discuss that internally. So hopefully that helps answer that question a little bit.
So we'll be just taking the last two questions now. One is about images. What is the general rule of thumb in getting images off web for use on Facebook in terms of copyright?
The general rule of thumb is you can't just Google an image and save it and use it. So you need to be, I would err on the side of extreme caution with this. There are, I'm sure you're probably all aware of Flickr, or you've heard of it, so you know it's an images blog platform. A lot of people on Flickr will allow you to use their images with a credit, and that's certainly okay. And that also, I think, comes back to our earlier question about getting permission to use content. So you either need written permission from the person who owns the copyright of that image, or who's posted that on their blog or their Flickr account, or if you're taking something off Flickr, it needs to be clearly stated on that person's account on Flickr that they're happy for you to use it. For me personally, it's very time consuming to do that, and you're better off building your own image library or subscribing to one. And obviously that's a cost and a resource, but the more you can create your own content or buy stock images, the safer you will be. I actually know of an experience where a travel organisation was using an image they'd had in their image library for about 5 years by a photographer, and he turned around and wanted payment for use of that image 5 years later, and obviously several staff members later, because they'd never sought the original copyright permission from him. So you have to be really careful as well if you're coming into a role and you're not sure what the source of that image is or where it's come from. I wouldn't use it. Be really careful with that. You might think you're a little organisation that nobody's going to come after, but you don't even want to take the risk. So it can be really tough finding images and getting some variety in your social media, but if you run events or you run anything where you can get a good camera and take your own photos, I'd encourage you to do it. They don't have to be professional quality all the time on social media. Sometimes a picture, as long as it's clear and it's not blurry, a picture that looks less staged is better for engagement, and people will respond to it more a lot of the time. So yeah, really exercise caution with taking images off the web. You can't Google image something and take it off and use it necessarily just with a credit. That doesn't always fly with copyright law a lot of the time, so be really careful with doing that.
Okay, this would be our last question. Is it a good idea to link your Facebook post with Twitter?
No, I don't think so. And look, this is just my personal opinion. I know that it's very attractive to do that, particularly when you're really pushed for time. But I honestly believe it's not great. If you look at how it looks on Twitter, when you post something on Facebook and then it links to Facebook, it's not a great experience for the user on Twitter. You can't put a hashtag in there on Twitter. There's nothing wrong with posting the same content if it speaks to both those audiences. If you've looked at Twitter and you know who's following you on Twitter and you know who your Facebook audience is and you want to put the same content, that's fine. I would take the extra minute to cut and paste it into those two separate channels. Because it's just not a great experience for Twitter, and it also shows that you know, if you're producing the content in Twitter, then you're really giving yourself some kudos as a brand, I think, and showing that you really putting yourself out there with social media. So I would avoid it. I would avoid it at all costs, but that's me personally. I know that's not realistic for a lot of organisations, but really it takes an extra minute to cut and paste that content into Twitter if you're putting it on Facebook as well.
Well, Kirsty, that was our last question. Do you have any last words that you want to say?
No, just thank you everybody for your attention today, and some of my details are on the front of the on the presentation if you want to make contact, and I'm happy to answer any other questions if via Twitter or email or my website if anybody has any. Thank you very much for your attention today. Hopefully you're all still awake.
Thank you, Kirsty. Thank you, and thank you for staying over time here. And thank you each and every one of you who could join us today. If you still have questions, like Kirsty mentioned, you can visit her website. You can follow her on Twitter. Also, you will be receiving an email shortly with a link to the recording and the slides. So until next time, thank you and bye-bye.